A field in Kent, spring 1944. A column of Sherman tanks sits in the morning mist, parked in formation, ready to roll toward the coast. From the air, German reconnaissance pilots photograph them. They count them. They report them. The numbers travel up the chain all the way to Berlin. But none of these tanks have engines. None of them have crews. 2 men in coveralls can lift one of them and carry it across the field by hand. The German High Command is looking at an army that does not exist, and they are about to believe in it for the rest of the war. This is the story of how the Allies built a lie large enough to deceive Adolf Hitler, and held it together long enough to land on a beach in Normandy. By the spring of 1944, the Second World War had reached a point where the next 12 months would decide everything. The Allies had to cross the English Channel. There was no other way back into occupied Europe, and the Germans knew it. Along the French coast, Hitler had built the Atlantic Wall. Concrete bunkers, beach obstacles, artillery batteries, and minefields, stretching from Norway down to the Spanish border. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had been put in charge of strengthening it. The Germans did not know exactly where the invasion would land, but they had logic on their side. The shortest crossing from England to France was the Strait of Dover, 21 miles of water between Dover and the Pas-de-Calais. It was the obvious place. It was where every staff officer in Berlin expected the blow to fall. The Allies had decided to land somewhere else. They had chosen Normandy, further west, longer to reach, harder to supply. The advantage was simple. It was the place the Germans were not watching most closely. But for that advantage to hold, the Germans had to keep believing in the obvious answer. In London, a small, secret committee was given the job of making sure they did. Winston Churchill summarized what they were attempting in a single sentence. In wartime, truth is so precious that she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies. The lies had a code name, Operation Bodyguard, and inside it was the largest of them all, Operation Fortitude. Fortitude had 2 halves. In the north, it threatened Norway, hinting at a phantom Allied force gathering in Scotland. This pinned German divisions in the fjords, far from the real battlefield. In the south, it did something stranger. It invented an entire army. The 1st United States Army Group, FUSAGE, was placed on paper in the southeast of England. It had a shoulder patch. It had divisions. It had a stated objective, the Pas-de-Calais, and it was given the most feared American commander of the war as its public face, Lieutenant General George S. Patton. Patton was a name the Germans took seriously. If Patton was in Kent, then Kent was where the hammer would fall. The army around him was built piece by piece by the British Army's deception units working with American and Canadian troops. In the harbors and estuaries of southeast England, engineers assembled dummy landing craft from scaffolding tube, wood, canvas, and empty oil drums, convincing from the air, useless on water. In the fields, they laid out inflatable tanks, dummy artillery, and decoy aircraft. From a high-altitude reconnaissance photograph, a rubber Sherman looked identical to the real thing. And beneath the white cliffs at Dover Castle, in tunnels that had once directed the evacuation of Dunkirk, British and Canadian signalers worked around the clock, 8-hour shifts, 7 days a week. They sat at radio sets and transmitted thousands of coded messages, orders, supply requests, weather reports, troop movements. the daily breathing of an army. The signalers had no idea what they were sending. They only knew it never stopped. In Berlin, intelligence analysts plotted the chatter on their maps. The army in Kent grew larger by the week. It did not exist. Inflatable tanks and radio static could only do so much. For the deception to be believed at the level of the German High Command, it needed to be confirmed by human sources, by spies, the kind of intelligence that arrives in a sealed envelope and is treated as truth. The Allies had something the Germans never suspected they had. They had the Germans' spies. By 1944, every German agent operating in Britain was either dead, in prison, or working for British intelligence. Captured at landing sites with the help of decrypted Enigma traffic, given a choice between execution and cooperation, almost all of them chose to cooperate. They were managed by M15's B1A section, under a charming Scottish officer named Thomas Argyle Robertson, known to his colleagues as Tar. The system was supervised by the 20 Committee, named for the Roman numerals XX, a double cross. The agents themselves were not professionals. They were a collection of refugees, criminals, gamblers, aristocrats, and idealists. A Serbian playboy, a Peruvian socialite, a Polish fighter pilot, a French woman who traveled with her dog, an English safecracker, and one Spaniard. The Spaniard's name was Juan Pujol Garcia. Before the war, Pujol had failed at chicken farming. He hated fascism, watched Spain fall to Franco, and decided he wanted to fight Hitler. He offered his services to the British. They refused him, so he offered his services to the Germans, with the intention of betraying them. The Germans accepted. From a hotel room in Lisbon with no contacts in England, Pujol invented a spy network out of public sources and his imagination. He wrote reports about a Britain he had never seen. The reports contained errors so obvious they should have given him away. But the Germans were convinced. They paid him. They trusted him. British intelligence intercepted his reports through Bletchley Park, traced them back to Lisbon, and realized what he was doing. They brought him to London and gave him a code name, Garbo, named for his talent as an actor. By June 1944, Garbo was running on paper a network of 26 subagents across Britain. Every one of them invented. He was sending hundreds of coded messages to his German handlers, all of them written with the help of his MI5 case officer, Thomas Harris. The Germans treated him as their most reliable source in England. They were about to act on what he told them. The deception depended on a single fragile assumption. The Germans had to keep believing, not just before the invasion, but during it and after. If the lie collapsed in the first 48 hours, the Germans would release their reserves, including the powerful 15th Army, still sitting at Calais. Those reserves would arrive at Normandy while the Allies were still pinned on the beaches. The landings would fail. There was no margin. And in the spring of 1944, the lie almost did collapse. The agent who came closest to destroying it was a French woman codenamed Treasure. Her real name was Natalie Sergeyev. She had been feeding misinformation about FUSAG into the German intelligence service from neutral Portugal. She was also keeping a secret. Her German handlers had given her a control signal, a small, hidden trigger she could insert into any message to warn them that she had been captured and turned. If she ever sent it, every report she had ever made would be re-evaluated. The deception would unravel. She did not tell the British about the control signal, not until May 1944, 3 weeks before D-Day, and she had a reason to consider using it. Her dog had been left behind in Gibraltar, in quarantine, and had died there. She blamed her British handlers. She wanted them to feel it. Her case officer, Mary Shearer, and Tar Robertson faced an impossible decision: arrest her and risk her silence becoming its own signal, trust her, and gamble the entire operation on the loyalty of a grieving woman. They trusted her. The control signal was never sent. In the early hours of June 6, 1944, the real invasion began. 5 beaches, nearly 133,000 men in the first wave alone. But before they arrived, the deception sent one last set of ghosts ahead of them. Over the channel, RAF bombers flew tight, slow patterns, dropping strips of metallized foil called window. On German radar, the foil looked like an enormous fleet of ships approaching the Pas-de-Calais. The operations were named Taxable and Glimmer. Inland, hundreds of dummy parachutists. Small canvas figures rigged with firecrackers fell into the French countryside as part of Operation Titanic, drawing German defenders away from the real drop zones. And in London, Juan Pujol Garcia sat down at a transmitter. Garbo's job was not to warn the Germans away from Normandy. It was to warn them towards something else. In the hours and days after the landings, he sent message after message to his Abwehr handlers, explaining that Normandy was a diversion. The real attack, he said, was still coming. The 1st United States Army Group. The army that did not exist was still in Kent, still loading, still waiting, still aimed at Calais. The message reached the German High Command. It reached Hitler, and Hitler believed it. In the days after D-Day, as Allied troops fought to expand the beachhead at Normandy, the German 15th Army, 15 divisions, the strongest force on the Atlantic Wall, remained in place at the Pas-de-Calais. They waited for an invasion that was never coming. Reinforcements that could have driven the Allies back into the sea sat in their positions, watching an empty channel. According to German intelligence summaries later recovered after the war, at least 86 of Garbo's specific reports were included in high-level briefings. He was, by their measure, their most valuable agent in Britain. In July 1944, the Germans awarded Juan Pujol Garcia the Iron Cross, 2nd class. By that time, the Allies had broken out of Normandy. Belief in FUSAG persisted into August. Some German staff officers continued to expect a second landing into the autumn. Historians still debate exactly how decisive Fortitude was. Allied air supremacy, naval power, the failure of German reconnaissance, and command paralysis in Berlin all played their part. Fortitude did not win the war on its own, but it bought time. And on a beach, in the first hours of an invasion, time is the only thing that matters. After the war, almost no one knew what had happened. The signalers in Dover Castle had spent months sending messages they could not read. They went home, took other jobs, and were forbidden to speak about it. Some of them died, never having told their families. Tar Robertson and the 20 Committee dissolved. Their files were sealed for decades. Many were not released until the 1990s and 2000s. Juan Pujol Garcia feared German reprisal. With British help, he faked his own death from malaria in Angola and disappeared into Venezuela, where he ran a bookshop. For 30 years, the world thought he was dead. He was traced in the early 1980s by the writer Nigel West, agreed to come forward and was appointed a member of the Order of the British Empire. He had been awarded the Iron Cross by Germany and the MBE by Britain, possibly the only man in history to receive both. George Patton, the public face of an army that did not exist, took command of the very real U.S. Third Army in August 1944 and drove across France. He died in a car accident in December 1945. The inflatable tanks were quietly deflated, folded, and packed away. Some were used again in later exercises. Most were destroyed. The lie was retired without ceremony. What Operation Fortitude proved was not that the Allies were cleverer than the Germans. It proved something older and harder to face. People do not see what is in front of them. They see what they have already decided must be there. The German High Command had decided long before 1944 that the invasion would come at Calais. Every photograph of an inflatable tank, every intercepted radio message, every report from a trusted spy was read through that belief and used to confirm it. The Allies did not have to convince Hitler of something new. They only had to feed him something he already wanted to believe. That is why the lie held. That is why the army that did not exist sat in the German maps long after the real one had broken out of Normandy. And that is what the rubber tanks in a Kent field, weighing nothing at all, were truly built to do. Not to fight a war. To win one